Our story begins in the attic of a ramshackle house, where a madcap inventor known as Professor Pickle is tinkering away at his latest invention. Now, this contraption may look like a cross between a washing machine and a toilet, but with the addition of a few choice modifiers, it actually functions as a time machine. See, the professor has discovered that unpleasant smells have a peculiar effect on the space-time continuum. By combining the musky reek of old gym socks with the potent stench of day-old cheese, he's managed to crack the code to temporal travel. Unfortunately, the exact combination of smells necessary to trigger the machine is rather finicky, and when the professor accidentally spills a vial of putrid pepper spray into his mixing device, the results are catastrophic. The room disappears in a flash of light, and when it reappears, the professor finds himself in a strange new world. Now, as it turns out, the smell of putrid pepper spray happens to coincide with two specific moments in history. The first is right here, right now, or at least it will be in about 145 million years, for the professor has just stumbled into the age of dinosaurs. As the professor stands there, gawking at the enormous beasts lumbering around him, a particularly pungent trio of triceratops amble into frame. They're led by the biggest, baddest-looking dino of them all, a Tyrannosaurus rex with a severe case of halitosis. She stops dead in her tracks upon spotting the professor and demands to know what he's doing in her neck of the woods. You see, she's the notorious T-Rex, known as Bubble Breath, whose foul breath is so bad it kills. She takes one whiff of the professor and promptly drops to her knees, overwhelmed with emotion. Turns out the smell of putrid pepper spray is her favorite in the entire world, so she adopts the professor as her personal servant, and they set off to find her a delicious snack. But after a while, the professor starts to get a bit homesick. He tinkers together a new device that allows him to send a message back to his former lab assistant, a dim-witted ferret named Fitzhugh. Unfortunately, Fitzhugh mistakes the professor's SOS signal for a midnight snack and inadvertently activates the stinky time machine. Suddenly, the professor is whisked away from the Mesozoic era and deposited in a bustling medieval marketplace. He finds himself in the middle of the annual cheese festival, an event so legendary that people travel from across the land to attend. That is, of course, if they can stand the smell. See, the air is thick with the aroma of aged cheddar, ripe camembert, and questionable fish. To the average person, the professor explains, these smells would be considered quite pleasant, but to him, thanks to his sensitive schnoz, they are absolutely horrid. He runs off in search of some fresh air, but quickly finds that the entire city stinks. It's clearly the Middle Ages for a reason. As he makes his way through the crowded streets, the professor comes across a gaggle of knights gearing up for a jousting match. As the first knight charges toward his opponent, the professor steps into the courtyard and trips on a stray chicken. In doing so, he knocks over a bucket of stale urine, which promptly splashes onto the poor knight. Of course, in the medieval era, such an accident was considered a death sentence. But the professor quickly befriends the knight after discovering that he too has a super sense of smell. Together, they concoct a plan to help the knight win the jousting match. The professor ties several vials of extremely smelly substances to the back of the knight's horse, which causes such a putrid plume to emanate from its backside that both opponents fall unconscious. Naturally, this act of sabotage wins the professor the ire of the entire kingdom, and he and his new friend barely escape with their lives. They flee to the safety of the nearby forest, but are soon captured by a band of marauding peasants. They demand to know who put the stink bombs on their horses, and when the knight refuses to cooperate, they tie him to a tree and threaten to, well, let's just say, things aren't good. At this point, the professor knows he has to do something drastic to save his friend. So he takes a deep breath and lets loose the most disgusting, vile stench he can muster. The peasants drop to the ground, writhing in pain, allowing the professor and the knight to escape. They take off into the forest, pursued by the angry mob. The professor stumbles and falls, but luckily a friendly badger helps him up and leads him to safety. Meanwhile, the knight gets cornered by the peasants. But just as they're about to make an example of him, a squadron of robotic police appears and arrests them all. It turns out that the smell of stale urine is the national scent of the future, and the peasants have committed a serious crime against olfactory etiquette. The professor is overjoyed to have finally found a place where his super sense of smell is not an inconvenience. But his happiness is short-lived. See, the robotic police are led by the ruthless Commander Chrome, whose advanced olfactory sensors have detected a dangerous odor, a smell so offensive it could potentially shut down the entire robotic police force. Can you guess what that smell might be? That's right, it's the lingering aroma of the stinky time machine. The professor is horrified to learn that his accidental emissions are putting an entire society at risk. He apologizes profusely and offers to fix the situation with a few well-aimed burps. But the commander won't hear of it. Instead, he imprisons the professor in a nearby detention center, vowing to erase his disgusting smell once and for all. The professor manages to befriend a fellow inmate, a goofy cyborg whose positronic brain has gone haywire, causing him to emit a constant stream of fart noises. The professor learns that the only way to stop the noise is to trigger a short circuit in his brainstem, which, coincidentally, also happens to be the spot where the supervillain keeps his stash of incredibly smelly hair pomade. The professor sneaks into the villain's quarters and smears the pomade all over the goofball's noggin, causing him to short-circuit and fall silent. Unfortunately, the commotion attracts the attention of the robotic police, and a squad of elite, chrome-plated enforcers appear to drag the professor to his doom. One of them even happens to be the goofy cyborg's ex-girlfriend, who promptly breaks down in tears upon seeing her former flame in such a sorry state. The professor is touched by her compassion and decides to sacrifice himself in order to free her from the clutches of the oppressive regime. He jumps into the waiting robot's arms and triggers a massive explosion that destroys the entire police force and sends everyone tumbling through the corridors of time. They reappear in the professor's attic, along with a host of bizarre creatures from across the ages, including a dinosaur with a severe case of halitosis. The professor is disappointed to learn that none of his inventions worked properly, but he soon cheers up after realizing that his greatest discovery wasn't time travel at all. It was friendship. He shares a hearty laugh with his new pals, even the ones who want to eat him, until it's time for them to go. The professor bids them farewell and returns to his tinkering, determined to make another go at temporal travel He doesn't have much time to work, however, because it's not long before Fitzhugh, the ferret, accidentally activates the stinky time machine once again, hurtling the professor on another crazy adventure. Thanks for coming along with us on this adventure. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Good night, little one.